The first used oil analysis I did on my 2017 Honda Accord after switching to valvoline, restore and protect showed an abnormally high reading for iron as well as manganese and silicon, and so I mentioned in that video that I was going to be doing serial used oil sample analysis while continuing with the 0w-20 variant of valvoline, restore and protect. Today I'm taking the second oil sample and sharing the results. I'll also give a quick take on whether I'll be switching to valvoline, restore and protect 5w-30 oil. Now let's get this. I've got this 500ml syringe. I also have my oil sample bottle and some blue Scott Workshop towels for keeping things clean. I'm taking the oil sample from the dipstick hole. I've chosen this for consistency since I might not be changing out the oil each time I take a sample. A small tip that if you're going to be using one of these big syringes, Teflon tape is your friend. Mine was initially leaking from this area and so I had to put some Teflon tape on. And so we go in, I push in the tubing to the marked depth and then I start extracting the oil. Like I said in the first video, I wouldn't be going past 6 months for any oil change interval anymore, and so although my oil life is still at 50% and I've driven 2,676 miles, I'll be changing this oil since I've already hit 6 months. For the first interval I was going only by mileage and it took up to 8 months before I got above 4,000 miles. I've drawn sufficient volume at this point and it's time to squirt it into the sample bottle. With all of that done, I send off the sample to Blackstone Labs, and fast forward to today, I now have the results. Let's start with the general comment. Iron and silicon improved, and not just due to shorter oil change interval. This amount of iron or steel wear isn't excessive, but it's more iron that we would expect for this mileage. Iron accumulates with mileage, and so we'll look for more progress after the oil has been changed, and so on and so forth. Let's start with the oil properties section. Viscosity at 100 degrees centigrade or 212 degrees Fahrenheit is 7.73 centistokes, which is fine. The flash point is also looking good, and there's no fuel dilution at less than 0.5%. You usually become concerned if it's above 2%. All of this just means that 0w-20 valvoline, restore and protect stayed within this oil weight or grade during this whole duration of driving. Zero of water and coolant simply means my head gasket is still in perfect shape. Moving over to wear metals, iron is now at 12 parts per million, and to compare it to the previous 33 ppm, I convert both figures to parts per million per 1,000 miles of driving, and with that we can see that iron was 8 parts per million per 1,000 miles for the first report, and that has now decreased by 50%. This backs my earlier theory that the elevated iron was probably coming from ferrocene, which is an ingredient you find in the oil fuel additive I was using at the time. Similarly, manganese has reduced to 24 parts per million compared to 103 in the other reports. This comes to 9 parts per million per 1,000 miles driven, as against 24 parts per million per 1,000 miles. That's a decrease of over 260%. Again, the oil fuel additive is the most probable culprit here, as additives such as this tend to use organometallic catalysts, which typically contain manganese. I'm not saying that oil is a bad additive, but just to note that it's going to skew your results if you use it. Silicon remains high, and in real terms it experienced just a 2 parts per million per 1,000 miles decrease if I compare it to the first result. Oils do contain silicon as an anti-foaming agent, but above 20 or 30 is usually considered high, and so to tackle potential contamination from the air intake, I'm installing this Wix air filter. Wix tends to make reputable automotive filters. I hadn't necessarily paid attention to the air filters I use. I just used the nearest aftermarket thing around, and I'll watch out for the levels in subsequent oil reports. There wasn't any other thing of note in the additives package section. For now, I'm going to be sticking with 0w-20 of valvoline, restore and protect, since this result is just from my second sample of the oil, and technically you need about 2 oil change intervals to rule out any interaction between remnants of the previous oil brand that you were using. Also, I'm conscious of the fact that restore and protect is still cleaning out the ring lands and grooves, and wear metals may be stuff that has accumulated there over the years. I expect that the third report will paint a clearer picture of what's happening with this engine. Hope this has been helpful. Thank you very much for watching. catch you on the next one. Peace.